This presentation is on soil characteristics, and this is for the basic ag class. Soil is a layer of natural materials on the Earth's surface containing both organic and inorganic materials and capable of supporting plant life. Now, organic is derived from living materials. Inorganic are from materials that were never living, such as rocks. Okay, soil is a material that is the Earth's surface in a thin layer. It can be covered by water or it may be exposed to the atmosphere. And by water we mean the seas, rivers, bayous, streams, lakes, etc. There are four main components of soil, and this is inorganic material, organic matter, water, and air. Ideal soil should contain about 50% solid material and 50% pore space. The 50% pore space are actually spaces that are in between the solid material. And this pore space can contain either air or water. And this is how the water moves through the soil, is in the pore spaces. So you do want half of the soil to be open holes so that water and air can move through. So about half of the pore space should contain water and half of the space should contain air. Inorganic material consists of rocks slowly broken down into small particles. The organic material is made up of dead plants and animals in varying stages of decay. So the plants die on the surface, they die on top of the surface, but then there's part of the plants underneath the surface that also dies and decays as well. Also in the soil are microorganisms, worms, invertebrates, and other animals. So not all animals are on top of the soil, but they are in the soil as well. The percentages of the four main soil components varies depending on the kind of vegetation, amount of mechanical compaction, and the amount of soil water present. So if the water is on top of the soil, vegetation will not be in abundance. If you're looking at a dirt road, the soil will be mechanically compacted from all of the traffic. So that can also be compacted for other things too, but most of it is because of vehicles. That's why there's mechanical compaction. We get mechanical compaction in fields as well when farmers are planting or harvesting. So the types of soil components depend on what kind of plants are growing there, if there's been a lot of mechanical compaction, and the amount of soil water that is available. Soil takes a very long time to be formed. It takes a long time for living material to be decayed. It takes a long time for minerals to be broken down from rocks. Rock is slowly broken down to small particles resulting in soil. Weathering. New soil is continually being made, but it takes a long time to create new soil. And if it isn't managed properly, soil can be eroded away quicker than it can be made. So if the soil is exposed, there are no plant materials on it, and there is a lot of rushing water or even some water, the soil can be washed away with the water, or if it's a lightweight soil particle, it can be blown away by wind. In most soils, the proportion of organic matter is relatively small, only 2 to 5%. Its importance in formation production is much higher than the small percentage would suggest. Soil organic matter decaying plant and animals. As they die, they are attacked by microorganisms, fungi, bacteria, and others. And these microorganisms aid in the breakdown of the decaying plant and animal material and make them into usable nutrients for other animals or for plants. Two types of organic matter. Original tissue is that portion of the organic matter that can still be recognized. Twigs and leaves covering a forest floor are good examples of original tissue because you can recognize that they are twigs and leaves. The purposes of the organic matter, it affects the soil structure. By serving as a cementing agent, it returns plant nutrients to the soil, PS&N, helps store soil moisture, makes soil more tillable for farming, provides food or energy for soil microorganisms, which makes the soil capable of plant production. It helps soften the minerals by adding some cushioning in between the minerals and the hard soil particles. So organic matter actually helps with the pore space and the softening, and it helps hold the particles together as well as by being a cementing agent. If we're going to characterize soils, you look at a soil profile. And to do this, a hole must be dug. And it's typically called a pit. It's a very large hole or pit that's dug down into the soil several feet. And as you look at the soil, they'll have layers. And there are three distinct layers, and they're called horizons. The horizons are called A for the top, B for the subsoil, and C for the parent material. The topsoil is the most productive because that is where all the nutrients are. And that's where the roots are located for most of our plants. Our smaller plants, the roots don't extend much beyond 8 inches. But for trees and shrubs and bigger plants, they will extend deeper. But most of them are getting their nutrients and their water from the topsoil. Slope is defined as the angle of the soil surface from horizontal. It is expressed as a percent of rise over run, and the slope is actually a hill. So how does the soil go from level up or down? It is a slope. The slope affects the productive potential in many ways. It can hasten rain runoff. If the soil is not covered up and it's not held in place by plants, then when it rains, the soil will erode, or the soil can be carried off by the wind. It also, the use of farm machinery and contour farming can help with the soil erosion, keeping it from eroding. The contour farming actually levels off parts of the slope to allow for the slowing down of the water running downhill. When we talk about texture and soil physical properties, it refers to the amount of sand, silt, and clay that's actually in the soils. So these are more like a ratio or a portion. If you were to slice a pizza into 8 sections, then you would have 8 proportions. Okay, let's talk about 4 proportions, sand, silt, and clay. Well, it's only 3, isn't it? So how much is the proportion of each one of those in the whole of the soil? And we name the texture of the soil depending on the amount of sand to silt to clay, or silt to sand to clay. So coarse texture soils are sandy and do not hold water well, while fine texture soils contain clay and tend to hold more surface moisture. Clay particles are very tiny and they don't have big pore spaces in between, therefore the water can't run down. The sand particles are very large and therefore have larger pore spaces, and they have more space for the water to run through. Topsoil and subsoil thickness refer to the depth of those layers that are available for plant production. Thin topsoil and or thin subsoil can greatly limit crop production because that means that those rocks, the parent material, are very shallow, and those are places where the roots cannot grow. So you really need, the land needs to have a thicker subsoil for plants to be productive. Otherwise, it's very limited to what kind of plants can be grown in that type of subsoil. You'd have to look for plants that have shallow roots. Then there is land capability classification. This categorizes the productive potential of the soil. Okay, so this is aside from the texture, aside from the horizon. So it classifies the top of the soil for agricultural use. The classes generally range from Class 1, which is the best land for agricultural production, to Class 8, which is not productive at all. In general, Class 1 through Class 4 are for row crop production, and Class 5 through Class 8 are not suitable for row crop production for some reason or another. Class 1 is the best land for row crop farming. It is level, well drained, deep, the texture is medium, it doesn't have erosion or flooding, and it can be very easily cultivated by being plowed, tilled, and planted. Class 2 is almost as good as Class 1, but it may have just a slight limitation, such as there's some slope or there's some erosion going on. Class 3 can still be cultivated, but it has some very severe limitations. It has moderate slope, erosion, or a shallow root zone, meaning that topsoil just isn't very deep, so the roots are going to be restricted to how deep they can grow. Class 4 has severe limitations, but can still be cultivated with good management practices. Those limitations could be erosion, significant slope, but the management practices that can deal with the erosion and significant slope are contour farming, in which a farmer takes his tractor and he breaks up the slope by putting in some flat spots along, going crosswise on the hill, going horizontal along the hill. He makes it flat, and it's like steps. When you look at the hill, it steps down. Class 5 is nearly level, but has some property which makes it unsuitable for farming. It may be very dry, very rocky, or most often very wet. This class is quite suitable for pasture, wildlife habitat, or forest production. Class 6 is just a more serious version of 5. Has more limitations, but can be used for the same things. Class 7 has some severe limiting properties. Very steep or severely eroded and have deep gullies. Class 7 may be very coarse. This can be turned into pasture, but grazing must be controlled. It can also be used as a forest or recreation. Class 8 has one or more extreme limitations. It should be left in its natural state for recreation and wildlife. It has little agricultural value. Soil classification. Remember what we talked about before was land classification. So now it's soil classification. The first unit of classification is the order. All soils fit into one of 10 orders. Each order is broken down into a suborder, which is broken down into great groups, then subgroups, and then families. A soil survey is the process of classifying soil. The results of the surveys in certain areas is published in what is known as the Soil Survey Report. Then they develop a map from the survey. Scientists then use this as a tool for figuring out the land capability. And that is the end of the PowerPoint.